All right, here we go. Well, it's great to have everybody here today. And for those of you that aren't with us, we're still glad to have you and make sure that you could, if you need any questions answered, that you DM us on the circle group. But really excited today to talk about sleep and pre-workout nutrition. So we're just going to go ahead and get right to it. So we're going to talk about sleep, pre-training nutrition, and then we're going to do some Q&A at the end. Now, many of you may not know, but my doctoral work was actually in sleep and stress resilience. And I love this subject because we're learning so much about sleep. It almost seems like every quarter, every few months, something new is coming out. It's one of these just kind of all-encompassing processes. Um, and so, why do we need to sleep? Well, there was a British dramatist in the 1700s named Thomas Dekker, and he said sleep is the golden chain that ties our health and human bodies together. And I just think that's such a proper statement. I think since the beginning of time, we've known that this is important. You don't get a good sleep, you're in a cruddy mood, you don't feel great, you're not operating well. It impacts everything from your mood, your body composition, your energy, your focus, your brain health, your hormones, literally everything. And one of the meetings we're going to have, or coaching calls we're going to have soon, is we're going to talk about stress because stress is really the gateway to improvement in pickleball and in life. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But your ability to adapt to stress, physical or mental stress, fundamentally boils down to two things: the right dose of stress and the having the right dose of rest or sleep. That equation is just very fundamental. And so, stress or sleep is your primary recovery mechanism. Before you start thinking about cold plunges and saunas and supplements or anything else, the number one most important thing is sleep. From an immune function perspective, sleep is when you create what's called immunological memory. It's really interesting that during slow wave sleep, our body kind of goes through this process where it's like, okay, I encountered these foreign invaders today, and then it creates immunological memory during that time. Um, there's a ton of hormone regulation that goes on during this time. Growth hormone is released during what's called slow wave or deep sleep, specifically in those first few hours of sleep. And growth hormone is primarily responsible for tissue regeneration. It's really a really important hormone. Later in sleep, so you sleep in these 90 to 120-minute cycles of sleep that are broken down into non-REM and REM sleep, non-rapid eye movement and rapid eye movement sleep. Later on in the night or later on during your sleep period, during REM phases, testosterone is released. And this is really critical. As you age, you can actually estimate your morning testosterone level by how much sleep you got and how fractured that sleep is. Meaning, like, did you wake up all like six, seven times during the night? In addition, you probably heard of something called cortisol, the stress hormone, quote unquote. Cortisol is very important. You want to have a spike in cortisol in the morning. It makes you alert, but you don't want to have elevated cortisol when you go to sleep. And so actually, when you go to sleep, cortisol is suppressed. And that's part of the reason you have these cool immunological things going on. And then finally, uh, these hunger hormones, leptin and ghrelin, are regulated. So kind of interesting. Have you ever noticed if you've gone 5, 6 days without getting adequate sleep, you may kind of get the munchies or you feel like you need to snack or eat? Um, it's because you have a dysregulation of leptin and ghrelin, and research demonstrates that when you kind of experience this partial sleep deprivation, people actually overeat around 385 calories a day. If you add that up over a week, that's a significant number of calories. And so it's very hard to maintain a healthy body composition and to have self-control if you're just chronically sleep deprived. It also improves your mental function and mood appropriate behaviors, meaning like how are you relating to others? Are you reacting to people appropriately? If any of you have kids, you know that like if you're sleep deprived during that time, you got to give your spouse a little bit of grace for each other because you may not be reacting the way that you should be reacting. Also, during the past 15 years, we've learned a lot about what happens to our brains when we sleep. But your brain, you've probably heard of this thing called the lymphatic system in your body. It's kind of this drainage system. Well, your brain doesn't have a lymphatic system, it has something called a glymphatic system. And what basically it allows for is different types of fluids to flow into your brain and out of your brain and to kind of flush different metabolic waste products out. One of which, or a group of which, are these proteins that are associated with neurodegeneration or like Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and traumatic brain injury. And so your brain literally flushes out a lot of these proteins at night. And the glymphatic system that's responsible for this is primarily active during sleep. And so if you don't get a good night's rest, I'm kind of hypothesizing this here, but that may be why some people experience brain fog during the day sometimes. But also you're doing yourself a disservice when it comes to the health of your brain over the long run. Real quick, I want to backtrack for just a second. I remember a very interesting stat. Um, Past the age of 30, roughly, your testosterone decreases at about 0.5% per year. Okay. But you can slow that down by resistance training, eating healthy, etc. If you get 5 or less hours of sleep per night over a week, you literally, research shows you age yourself in the terms of testosterone by about a decade just in a week period of time. So a lot of guys now are getting on TRT or testosterone replacement therapy. Really, the first thing they should be focused on is improving their sleep. Another thing that's really important as we all want to improve our skills in pickleball is that the learning process and memory consolidation is finalized during sleep. So during the day, let's say you go on the court and you're going to get introduced to a new skill that's challenging to you, right? And typically, when you're learning a new skill that's challenging, there's errors, there's correction, there's maybe a little bit of frustration. That's all great. That is part of the learning process. There are neurons in your brain that are marked during that learning period. And when you go to sleep, those neuronal connections are selectively strengthened and others are selectively weakened. Um, and that is part of the learning process, but this only occurs during sleep. And so you need adequate sleep to finalize and improve and actually speed up learning. There's a lot of really cool studies showing that people that memorize facts and then have a good rest, they actually remember them better because memories are consolidated during this period of time. So if you really want to speed up how quickly you're improving at pickleball, a big part of this is a neurological component, and that's going to happen during sleep. So let's talk about the three primary sleep behaviors. If any of you have like an Aura ring or an Apple Watch and you're looking at all this stuff and it was like, like deep sleep and just ignore all of that. There are only three things that I want you to focus on that are actually supported in the literature that can tremendously impact the quality and the quantity of your sleep. So first of all, I just want to start with this. Everybody, 99.9% of people on the planet need 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. If you're that person that's probably like, I do really great on 5 or less hours of sleep, I can almost promise you do not have the genetic SNP that allows you to operate. There's only a very minute part of the population that can sleep under 5 or 6 hours a night and be fine. Research shows that folks that sleep less than 7 hours or more than 9 hours have a higher risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. There's an increased chance of what's called all-cause mortality, meaning you're going to die an early death. That's not great information, but here's something really cool. If you really want to understand how much a behavior impacts people, you look at twin studies because twins are so genetically similar that if one twin does something different than the other, you can really measure it. Well, there was a study of over 21,000 twin pairs over 20 years, and they found that the twin that slept less than 7 hours a night had an increased risk of all-cause mortality by 24%. That's insane. Okay. So, okay, now you're like, great, Eric, thanks for telling me how long I should sleep. Well, give me some help on like how to do this better. We're going to get there in a second. I'm going to give you all this. Okay. I just wanted to put this paper on here. You don't have to read it all, but when you go to bed matters as well. That's the second most often question I get. Well, like if I go to bed, especially when I was working with college athletes, if I go to bed at 1 and wake up at 10, is that the same thing as going to bed at 10? No, it's not. There was a paper that was put out in 2021 by researchers at Harvard, MIT, and the University of Colorado. And it was a really, really large study. Over 800,000 people were included in this study from the UK Biobank. And they used everything from wearable trackers to genetic data to questionnaires. And they found that if you go to bed earlier by 1 hour, that it reduced your risk of major depression by 23%. If you shifted your sleep back 2 hours, so let's say you typically go to bed at 1 o'clock and you went to bed at 11 o'clock, there was almost a 40% reduction in major depression. Well, the question is like, why is that? Well, the reason for this is your relationship to sunlight. When you view the people that go to bed earlier and wake up earlier get more natural exposure to the sun. Your likelihood that you're going to be outside is greater. When you view sunlight in the morning, in particular, it anchors something called your circadian clock. Everybody heard of your circadian rhythm, right? Well, your circadian rhythm is entrained by these things called Zeitgebers, or that's German for time givers. One of which, and the most powerful one, is sunlight. So above the roof of your mouth is a bundle of nerves called the SCN. And when you view a certain quality of light through your eyes, it stimulates this SCN. It sends a signal to the rest of your body that it's time to be alert and wake up. And it does this by increasing your core temperature, increasing cortisol. One of the most powerful things that you can possibly do is get at least 10 to 15 minutes of sun exposure in the morning. And I'm not talking about in your car, Christopher. I'm talking about outside. I'm just messing with you, Christopher. I love the fact that you're in the car, but actually outside, even if it's cloudy, because the intensity or the lux of light is stronger. Now, I know it's winter and not all of us are in great locations. This will change how you feel, because when you view that sunlight, there's a cascade of hormonal and neurological events that impact so many downstream things. In addition, it also impacts later in the day your body's ability to increase melatonin, which is that sleepy hormone. So the number one thing I could say is get 10 to 15 minutes of early morning sun exposure. And then also there was a paper that came out in the past 6 months that showed that in elderly populations, you could predict how many times they would wake up at night by how much sun they got in the middle of the day. Especially around, it was very interesting. They pinpointed it down to a specific time. It was around 1 o'clock. So you want to get sunlight in the morning and sunlight in the afternoon. I know everybody's got different work schedules, but for me, I like to go on a short walk after I eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Some days it doesn't work out perfectly, but I like to get out and walk around. I'll even do phone calls that way. Okay. And the last thing is consistency. You want to have a consistent sleep schedule. There's something called social jet lag. It's just like it sounds, jet like you ever fly to another country or you fly. Whenever I go from central to western time zone, I get jacked up. But you get jet lag, you're groggy. If you have a sleep schedule, let's say Sunday night through Thursday night, because you got work, right? And then Friday and Saturday night, you're like, all right, it's Netflix time, it's whatever, right? You go to bed 2 or 3 hours later, you sleep in. I think this audience is old enough. Does anybody remember the movie Office Space? Remember, like somebody's got a case of the Mondays? Like the reason people have a case of the Mondays is because they have one sleep schedule during the week and another on the weekends, and their body's totally dysregulated. It can lead to weight gain, depression, all sorts of bad things. So I'm not saying don't be a human. I'm not saying like don't go out on a date with your whatever, right? Just you want to try to keep your sleep onset when you go to bed and wake up roughly when the in a 1 hour window of each other. If Friday night's date night or whatever, that's fine, but get back on track on Saturday. This will make a tremendous difference in how you feel. If you just start with this, you will feel a lot different. You'll be more consistent in how you show up every day. The last thing is this, it's sleep hygiene. So like, how do I create the conditions for restful and fulfilling sleep? Number one, get more sunlight. Okay. Morning, as much as you can. Go outside, 10-minute walks. When your bedroom should be like a cave. So if sunlight is an alerting signal in the morning, what do you think light does in the evening? It signals to you that I should be awake. Like we weren't designed to be like in these artificial environments all the time with super bright lights, right? So what you want to do, our bodies just don't function well with that. As the sun goes down, start dimming the lights in your house. And your bedroom should be as dark as you can possibly make it. Um, like if you live in a busy city, like blackout curtains or put a drape over the window. If you're take your cell phone, turn it over. Do not sleep with the TV on. That is like a death sentence. There's a lot of really good research on how bad that is for you. You do not get into deeper phases of sleep the way you should. All sorts of bad, higher blood sugar, crazy. Cold. It's not hard to keep your bedroom cold this time of year. Should be comfortably cold. You don't want to be hot when you sleep, and then you want it to be quiet. Again, if you live in a busy area, you could use a white noise maker if you want that, but you don't want like these crazy loud noises. Look, if you got kids, totally understand that, right? Like there's phases of life. But if you travel a lot, I highly recommend a sleep mask. That's another sleep, like I hate the word hack, but that's a really cheap way to improve your sleep. 10 or 15 bucks, wear a sleep mask. It's a game changer. So that kind of concludes the part on sleep. If you have any questions, let's hold those to the end. And then because I want to get through this so that I know LC's got to hop a little bit early, but if you have any questions, just write them down your phone or a notepad. We're going to go ahead and turn it over to Pratik now.
Yeah, so one of the most important concepts of sports nutrition or nutrition to help support your performance is making sure that you know what you're going to be experiencing from a training perspective, from a competition perspective, and making sure that you have a good handle on your pre-training nutrition is something that can provide a huge amount of benefit. And I know a few of you have already gone through tournaments or you're trying to prep and set up tournaments. And I know Phil, you just had one. So hopefully, some of the things that we had talked about helped you out. And I'm glad that you ended up winning, which is always nice to see. So you might be asking, well, hey, why should I care about what I eat before I train or what I eat before a competition? Well, the truth is, as you know, anytime you're on the court, anytime that you're in the weight room, anytime you're doing anything training wise, you're going to be utilizing energy for the most part based on the intensities and the heart rate response. We're going to be utilizing muscle glycogen, which is a storage form of carbohydrate in the body. So we want to make sure that you're not low when you're going into a training session. You're kind of topped off as much as possible, because the harder you can go in a session, the more you can give, the better it sets yourself up for actually taking advantage of what that training session is going to do for you. Or if you're going into competition phases, you want to be able to maintain your work output for as long as you are competing. Sometimes you don't know how many matches you might get into. And it's a little bit of a guessing game because the seeding, the duration of the matches, how long are you going to continue to go if you keep winning? So making sure that you've got enough energy is only going to be in your best interest. So consuming the appropriate amount beforehand, maintaining these blood glucose levels, making sure that amino acid levels are topped off, because based on research, we can burn through about 10 grams of essential amino acids per hour of intense training. So it's not just about carbohydrate. That's the reason why, yeah, we've got these protein recommendations for you. So whatever we can do to make sure that you are improving the quality of your workouts, you're delaying fatigue, getting more quality work done. Another big piece of this is we not only use our muscles when we're training and competing, we have to use our brain. Our brains are very highly metabolically active. They use about 20% of the total energy we expend. So it's not, pumping muscle, it's not exerting a lot of force, but it is used and needed for a variety of different things. So our brains run on glucose. It's made up of, essential fatty acids. So if we have the appropriate nutrition in, it does help support cognitive function. So if you are thinking through the different strategies in a match, and you want to make sure that you're on top of your game and then you're not sluggish or you just can't think right. Sometimes that happens when nutrition just kind of goes by the wayside or when fatigue exacerbates itself a little bit earlier. So there are some general considerations when it comes to like, hey, how can I think of my pre-training nutrition? What should I select? Well, the timing of training. How soon are you going to be training? Do you typically eat an hour before? Do you have your a large meal, 3 to 4 hours prior to that? Everybody's going to be different. So the recommendations of what we want you guys to continue to utilize and implement are going to be person specific, but the goal is to try to find something that works for you and stick with it. So if it ends up being the same thing, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Consistency of knowing what to do and how your body's going to react is actually something that's going to be an advantage for you, instead of, oh, I need to get something different every single day. Well, you might end up eating something that your body doesn't necessarily tolerate that well for that particular day, and you might get an adverse outcome. The next, access to resources. So what do you have available? Are you going to be able to get home, put something together, and then head out to the courts? Or are you going to work, and then you're going to have to stop on by right afterwards? So, just understanding what's going on in your schedule and what you have to take with you. GI issues and training the gut. So if you're somebody that doesn't typically eat prior to training, or if you're training early in the morning and you find it difficult to eat a certain amount of food or get fluids in, that's completely understandable. Now, we're always going to have this position of we want to support high levels of quality training. And to be able to do that, we always highly recommend that you always go into a training session, especially even if it's in the morning, not fasted. But it doesn't mean you have to have this very large breakfast, eat a ton of different things. If you start small and you get the opportunity to train your body, train the gut to handle a certain amount of carbs, a certain amount of protein, a certain amount of fluid, over time, you can slowly build upon that. So you don't have to go from zero to, 4-course buffet all at once, but you can slowly integrate. Maybe it's a banana, maybe it's half a yogurt, maybe it's, a little bit of water and electrolytes. And as you get used to it over the course of a week or 2 weeks, and you recognize like, hey, I do feel pretty good, but I want to take it to the next level, then you can slowly increase the amount that you end up eating over time. Another big one is environment. Now, Phil, you had a tournament in very hot weather. Now, I'm jealous. We got 14 inches of snow about a week ago, and it's still
Oh,
pretty cold.
geez.
Yeah, I would do anything for warm, even humid weather. But the environment and thinking about some of these external factors, these X factors, is also very important, because when you are in hot conditions, your body typically utilizes more energy. You end up sweating more. So staying on top of your hydration strategy too becomes that much more important. As opposed to colder climates, you might not be as stimulated to drink more because you're not, feel like you're sweating as much, but you might lose fluid through more respiration because it is colder. So understanding like, hey, this is what the week looks like. I checked the weather app, nothing new out of the ordinary. I can just stay with my same program and protocol. Or Phil, you're like, hey, I've got a tournament here. Oh, the humidity's a lot more than it has been. I want to make sure that I'm prepping in place in advance. And then when everything is done, I want to make sure that I recover from that too. Um, some people get nervous. Some people have anxiety. It makes it difficult to eat. That's when maybe we go with fluid options. So if you can't eat fruit or oats or honey or, anything else like that, well, maybe we get a shaker bottle, we put in some water, we make a smoothie, we make a little bit of a shake. So if food is difficult, there are always options to try to do something from a fluid perspective, because then it also ties into hey, we have fluid recommendations for you before training. This kind of checks the box of two different things. And the last one is just medications. So this is the same protocol that Eric and I would put through with any athlete that we were working with. Tons of athletes take a variety of different medications for a variety of different reasons. There are always consequences to anything you end up ingesting, whether it's a medication, whether it's a supplement, good and bad, and just understanding that certain medications could, dehydrate you. They could potentially increase the need for certain micronutrients, inhibit the absorption of certain micronutrients, and just knowing that, if I am taking something, how does that impact my ability to, create energy and use it? Now, I really love this slide on the right. So this was just looking at muscle glycogen utilization and intensities of exercise. So muscle glycogen generally gets taken as a biopsy. So, they biopsy a little bit of muscle, they count the total number of, glycogen units, and they can tell you like, hey, based on your current muscle status, you have a high amount of muscle glycogen in there. So if you're training consistently, you're eating a lot of quality carbohydrates at the right time, the goal would be for you to maximize your muscle glycogen stores. So what this allows you to do is maintain a high level of work output for a longer period of time before fatiguing. Truth be told, we can't, sprint at our best or operate at, really, really high intensities or really high levels of our heart rate for an extended period of time. Like we're going to be burning through a ton of muscle glycogen. But if we're operating at moderate intensities, and generally pickleball is kind of played in and around there, and correct me if I'm wrong, around that 60 to 75% of your
Unless you're
VO2.
singles, but doubles,
Yeah,
yes, for sure.
doubles probably a little bit lower just
Yeah.
because you're not, moving around as much. But if you don't know how many matches you might play, and if you're playing singles and doubles, and it's not just one day, it's over the course of a few days, then you would definitely want to make sure that, hey, my nutrition's on point, and it's not just thinking about the day of and before. It's pre-training nutrition. It's now the day before, potentially 2 days before, just making sure that you are topping off that tank. Is based on this graph, we could see when you start higher, you can go for a longer period of time at some of those sub-max intensities, upwards of almost 3 hours, potentially even 4 hours, before you kind of just utilize most of that muscle glycogen. And when you get to that low level, when you've kind of burned through everything you have, that's when fatigue just massively hits. That's when you have really, really sore,
Bonking out.
bonking out, cramping, cognitive function. You're having difficulties like thinking. And that's what we want to try to prevent. So
So
moving.
for me, Pratik, I'm just trying to think through this. Like the take home is if I'm playing in a competitive event, I really need to make sure, especially if I think I'm going to be playing for 3 to 4 hours, that I am fueled appropriately in the morning. Um, and there's a manual I'm going to drop in the chat when we're done here that's got a whole lot on this, on what to eat 4 hours, what to eat 2 hours. I think LC, I sent this to you, I believe. And it lays it all out there. Anyways, I just wanted to like, that's how I'm thinking about this. Like it is, especially if you think you're gonna be playing, especially if you're playing 1, 2, 3 days, and you're somebody that's typically getting all the way to the medal rounds. This is a this is a huge competitive advantage because I've worked a lot with pro athletes, especially like MPL teams, and it's amazing how I just have seen like very few of them have like structured training like food available. And as the season went on and people were suffering, like they started, oh, we really need food. You can take this under your control, and it can be a serious competitive advantage.
Big time. So if you look at the part on the left here, it just talks about energy needs and energy demands. So how much energy are you expending depending on the type of training or the things that you're doing? So I think sometimes people have a little bit of a misconception with what they end up doing and how much energy they're expending and what they need to do to prepare for it. So going from the top to the bottom, that just shows your lowest to the highest energy needs and demands. And this is something that we experience quite a bit with even elite level NFL athletes. They think lifts are the end all be all when it's like, no, games and the practices that you go through expend more energy, put you through more physical muscle trauma than anything else that you're going to experience over the course of the week. So if you're only lifting, you're not going to expend a significant amount of energy. But if you lift and you do some type of conditioning session, you'll expend a little bit more. Or if you go into specifically pickleball training and you're hitting, you're drilling, you're skilling stuff for an hour, potentially even 2 hours, you're going to expend even more energy. And even more if you end up lifting that particular day too. And then we get to the end all be all, which is competition, where you might not know how many matches you're playing. You might be playing over the course of 3 days. You might be getting into the medal rounds. You might be playing for 3 hours potentially each day. That's going to utilize a lot of energy. And that's what's really necessary to make sure that your nutrition's on par for. So we've got general recommendations when we break down the macronutrients of, it's like, hey, how much should I eat? Now, I want to explain this because it's not that, 4 hours before you have to eat 4 grams per kilogram, and then 3 hours before you have to eat this. This is generally, I'll break it up into two. One is you might have a larger meal 3 to 4 hours out, if that's what your schedule allows. And then you'll have something a little bit smaller leading up to about an hour before. So you kind of fit and fix the time frame for when you know that you're going to be competing, or that you're training, and say like, hey, it's in 2 hours. So what my recommendation would be is to try to consume upwards or close to 2 grams per kilogram of carbohydrate for that 2 hours leading up until when you start. Now, if you only do one, that's fine, because everybody's going to be a little bit different. The amount of protein you'd want to eat is anywhere from 0.3 to 0.55 grams per kilogram. And in rule of thumb, that's anywhere from 20 to 40 grams of protein. So it's not a significant amount or a really crazy high amount. And this can be consumed an hour or 2 hours before. If it gets closer to when you're going to be starting your training or competition, we don't need a really high amount of fat and fiber. That generally slows down digestion, and you don't want a lot of food in your stomach and your system digesting slowly. You generally want it to go through the GI tract and get into the bloodstream, just so you have those nutrients available for when you do start training. So what I like to recommend is, like, anytime that you start a training session, workout, lift, combination lift and training, or especially competition, just take yourself through this pre-workout checklist, this pre-training checklist. First and foremost is carbohydrates. Okay, what carbohydrate foods am I going to be consuming? Where are they coming from? How much, based on the calculations that I've already done. Next will be protein, and you see that those are in capitalized. So because they're two of the most important. The next is, if it's a larger meal, 3 to 4 hours out, I can have a little bit, quality fat. To go along with that, making sure that your fluids and electrolytes are taken care of. So we've given you, calculations for 4 hours before, for 2 hours before. And in general, it's anywhere from 12 to 16 ounces, not anything crazy or chugging, 40 ounces before you start. It's more so getting in a consistent amount of fluid and just not entering a training session, or especially a competition, in a dehydrated state. And last, we won't talk about that too much, but we've already talked about, functional foods and supplements, things like collagen, things like creatine, if you want to take it in advance, whey protein, if that ends up becoming your protein option, if it just becomes a lot easier for you. Caffeine, if you're a fan of caffeine, there's an insane amount of research supporting caffeine and just endurance, performance, strength, and power. It's something that can add a good amount of value to you. So again, just breaking it down and trying to make it as simple as possible. Say you've got a really intense training session later on in the day, and maybe you have your lunch in and around the middle part of the day, and you're going to finish up work, and then you're going to get to your training session. So, lunch can be your pre-competition, pre-training meal. And then heading into when you start, maybe about an hour in advance, which I'll talk about in the next slide.
Oh.
Sorry. So again, it's just general things that we've kind of told you about with the checklist and how to figure out things. A really good quality complex carbohydrate, lean protein, high quality protein sources, really good quality fat sources. So again, putting together a meal shouldn't be too difficult. Hopefully by now it's just start making a lot more sense, whether it's breakfast, whether it's lunch, or whether it's dinner. It's just, making sure that we're checking off these boxes like, hey, we've got quality carbohydrate. We've got color, fruits and vegetables if needed. We've got lean protein. We've got a high quality fat source. And then getting closer to that hour, 90-minute mark, heading into a training session or heading into a competition, it can be something a little bit more defined. It doesn't have to be the large meal, it could be smaller snack items, and you can piece some of these things together. Now, some of these aren't actually my favorite that I use. They're favorites that I've used with a lot of athletes from a variety of different backgrounds, especially tennis. Recommended to pickleball athletes too. And feel free to try it out if you'd like. Obviously the goal would be to test it out during non-competition phases and never try anything new when you are getting into a competition. But again, everything holds true with following that checklist. So one thing I've had a lot of success with a lot of people is, Greek yogurt with like some raw natural honey. You can add a banana to it. You could add blueberries to it, and if you're a fan, then you can add dark chocolate to it because high in antioxidants and actually has a very positive effect on endurance performance. Or if you're like, hey, I don't have time for food, I got to shake something up and I've got to chug it and go. You could get some OJ, put some vanilla protein with it, or Greek yogurt. Throw some collagen in there, shake it up, and then drink it. It tastes like an orange creamsicle. Uh, Good old standard peanut butter and jelly sandwich. If you've kind of seen some of the recent reports that have been done on ESPN and a few other outlets, they talk about the absolute love of Uncrustables that NFL players have, and probably every college athlete, every higher level athlete I've worked with just is absolutely obsessed with Uncrustables. Now, the quality probably isn't the greatest in the world. Like making your own is definitely a lot better, but truth be told, from a nutritional perspective, heading into a training session, you kind of check these boxes, especially if you got like a higher protein bread and you got a good quality, natural nut butter. It doesn't necessarily have to be jelly. You could put banana and honey on there too. So again, you're checking the boxes of protein, carbs, a little bit of healthy fat. You could be a deli meat sandwich, deli meat roll up, or something as simple as, you want a protein shake, but you don't want to mix everything together and you want to have your carbs on the side. You can get some dates, throw a little bit of honey on there, and then you'll be good to go. So all these options generally are very easy to put together, and probably even more important, they're tasty. So you're going to want to look forward to doing them, and they're probably not going to put a lot of stress on your stomach and your GI, so you can handle it and you can get that really good quality energy when you start a really intense training session or as you're heading into a tournament. So look, they're infinite combinations. I mean, I just put together a small handful that I know have worked out really well for a variety of different athletes. But ultimately, you just got to kind of find out what works for you, and you can take some of our suggestions and try them out.
So let's open it up to questions. I know, Chris, I think you had one. You raised your hand earlier around the sleep time.
Oh yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's interesting that the topic of sleep comes up because for me, that's my biggest uh, hurdle right now. Um, I've never been able to sleep very well,
Mm.
um, but I've had times where I have. Recently, I just went through two full knee replacements,
Oh, geez.
and ever since my last, I did my last knee in November, and ever since then, my sleep is just it's awful.
Mm.
So, and I know how important sleep is. But I mean, I'll lay there for, I mean, literally 4 hours at night, like getting up, resetting, um, and then I'll get like 3 hours of sleep, and I'll be dead the following day, and then I'll go to bed the next night thinking, okay, there's no way that I'm not going to be able to sleep, and the same thing. And then after 3 or 4 days, it catches up to me, and then I'll sleep for like 15 hours because my body's just dumped.
Yeah.
Um,
Would I be wrong in saying maybe you get a little bit when one night, two nights, you get a little anxiety about going to bed?
oh, I massive anxiety. As soon as
Okay.
it's like 8 o'clock at night, I'm already thinking, okay, I'm gonna be going to bed here, in an hour, 2 hours, and I'm gonna lay there for
Yeah.
forever, and just my mind races, and it's awful.
Yeah. So this, I don't want to get into your stuff on like a group call. I'm happy to go back and forth on a DM, but like this is not uncommon at all. Not uncommon at all. And so first of all, like know that you're not alone on this one. And it can happen to anybody. Like I've had periods where like all of a sudden for 3 weeks, I'm like, I get it in my own head, right? a couple things that really help. You kind of want to distract yourself. So um before you go, like an hour before you go to bed, I would say, like, first of all, like, no TV, no social media. And the reason is it's not so much the light as it is it's emotionally stimulating.
The brain,
And
yeah.
yeah, so like, have you ever been like about to fall asleep and like made the
Oh,
cardinal sin of like, oh, I just want to go check one thing, and the next thing you're like wired, right? Like bad
scroll,
decision.
yeah.
So things like a warm shower, a hot shower is a really good idea.
Okay.
That actually kind of have this rebound effect and your body cooling itself. Reading a book, reading something that's really boring too. You could finish by
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. The more boring, the better. You could read something interesting and then finish by reading, like, I'm not kidding. Pull out the dictionary. Um, if you lay there and you're like, I can't, one a trick I learned from a friend. She's a sleep doctor. She said, start with the letter A and close your eyes and just start naming everything you can think of that starts with the letter A. And then when you run out, go to B. And you run out, go to C. And basically, you're distracting yourself until you kind of fall off.
I've
Um,
tried uh I've tried numbers, like counting backwards from 100 and just focusing on each number, and
yeah, you
it,
actually don't want to focus. You just kind of want to let your mind kind of just go through. And if you get to a point where like it's an hour and you're like, I can't get up and do something. Um, Another thing I would say is like clinical hypnotherapy can be like a game changer. And it's not like what you think. It's not stage hypnotherapy. It's not this weird, like somebody's gonna like take, it's a way of like kind of accessing the subconscious. And there's a great app called Reverie. Um
reverie.
Reverie. It's the guy, I can't remember, the researcher's name is eluding me right now. Is at Stanford. And there's these scripts that you can take yourself through, and it's like a mild stage of hypnosis, and you can do them for sleep. And they've helped folks that I know quite a bit.
Okay.
Um, and like these body scans. I don't know if you've ever done like a body scan during the day, or like something called a yoga nidra, or it basically what happens is you can, during the day, if you're really tired, you can do one of these. Just DM me and I'll send you some links, and it's an excellent way to get some rest. Um, so
Okay.
yep, David
Yeah,
Spiegel. That's
I've
right,
tried.
Justin.
Okay. I've
And
tried melatonin. I'm doing magnesium. Um, None of it helps. So,
sunlight, morning, afternoon, and get as much sunlight as you can. And then let's start on some of these things. DM me, I'll send you some different things. But yeah, the Reverie app, I've known quite a few people. I actually had a clinical hypnotherapist on my podcast. She was a lawyer, and she went through burnout and all this stuff, and then she got into clinical hypnotherapy, and really interesting stuff. Like, there's some really good data on it. It's not woo woo stuff.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, this is Phil.
What's
I
up,
had a
Phil?
couple questions. In terms of the doing the big meal,
Uh-huh.
um, and in doing our workout, I think you guys had mentioned if it was an option, like, and we had flexibility, it's better to do the workouts like later in the day. And I also was like reading some stuff online. It seems like there's like a group, like there's a lot of um information about that. But just in terms of like timing it, is it better to do it like just from a scheduling and also optimization perspective to do it before dinner or like after dinner? So I've been like kind of trying like kind of a 4 to 4:30 p.m. type of thing because it's kind of like after like 3 hours after lunch and then right before dinner. But I was also kind of curious about doing the workouts like after dinner. But then that kind of like makes it complicated with like eating really late at night. So I don't know. I
Yeah,
was
I
just kind of
would.
wondering how do you juggle that all? What have you guys figured out is like kind of the sweet spot?
I mean, Pratik, you can hop in here, but I would avoid eating late at night. For me, it disrupts my sleep. It's also harder to fall asleep for some people that exercise in the evening. Go ahead, Pratik.
Yeah, I like, what you had mentioned, if you can get it in around that 4:30 p.m. time range, and then once you finish, you can have your dinner, and dinner will end up becoming a recovery meal. And it kind of will fall in line with maybe that dinner is around between 6 to 7 p.m. And that would be, your last large meal about 3 hours before bed or so. I think it falls in line with good chrono nutrition and then good circadian habits of, cutting off that last large meal about 3 hours before bed and not pushing the training session too late, because if you eat dinner and then you have a training session, you'd ultimately want to eat afterwards too. And if that training session was really intense and it gets closer and closer to when that bedtime is, you potentially could be impacting your ability to want to fall asleep. Because recommendations are, if you're going to train, you'd want to do it at least 4 hours prior to when you want to go to bed, and not do it anywhere closer from 2 hours in, if you're trying not to impact sleep.
Got it. Okay. And then that's the other question was just a clarifying on this on the general recommendation slide that you presented with the carbs and proteins with the 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour. Is that saying that is that like um a recommendation on how much we should eat at each of those intervals at 1, 2, or is it like you pick one and then you just do that? Or is it you're
Yeah,
doing
you pick one. So if you're gonna have a large meal and then have something beforehand, say the large meal is 3 hours out, and then you have something an hour out, the cumulative amount of carbs you would want to try to eat would be 3 grams per kilogram with the 3 hours out plus the 1 hour out. Because for most people, there's there's no chance that you're going to be able to do this, and this in 1 hour intervals. That's just way too many carbohydrates,
yeah.
if that makes sense.
Okay. And then you were also talking about topping off like glycogen and then that type of thing. Like, is this are these recommendations to help assist in that, or is topping off glycogen like a combination of like what you're eating like 1 to 2, 3, 4 hours before and like the night before and during the day? Like, how do we think about that? Because I know we've been talking about like what do you do right before, what do you do like in the beginning of the day, and then what do you do the day before? Is it which one matters the most, and like which like eating like I guess um which uh yeah, which time that you eat like makes the most impact for that?
No, that's a great question. So the good thing about replenishing muscle glycogen, and it happens over the course of 24 hours after you finish a training session. Now, if the training session wasn't very intense, then all likelihood you didn't really utilize a ton of your muscle glycogen. So getting a chance to replenish it if you're eating carbohydrates, at different intervals over the course of the 24 hours following that training session, you're more likely going to be able to top it off and maximize. But if you're going into a really intense period where you're like, hey, I've got really intense training, and then I've got a tournament at the end of the week, and maybe you didn't do a really good job of, replenishing during the week, and then you go into the competition and, you just haven't been able to give it your all. I think that's when I go back to telling the athletes and people that I work with, you want to always think of two things. One is, what did I just do that I have to recover from? Two is, what do I have upcoming that I have to prepare for? So that will give you a little bit more of an indicator if you're doing, two sessions within 24 hours on the same day, or 2 to 3 sessions, within 1 to 2 days span, that, okay, I want to make sure that I'm really, consuming the appropriate amount of carbohydrate before and after, and at other meal snack intervals leading up until when I'm doing something else.
Yeah, and then is there any how much truth is there to like within 30 minutes of like after training there's like this like window of opportunity or something for replenishing glycogen. I've heard something about that, and I don't know how true like what you think about that.
It goes back and forth. If you're like a recreational athlete that's not competing, then it's not as important. So, if you like hitting the gym and, you do a little bit of cardio, then worrying about quick gains afterwards isn't that big of a deal. But if you're an athlete who's trying to compete at a high level, and you're going through different tournaments all throughout the year, and it's not limited just to a certain time point, then you want to be able to maximize recovery strategies. So it actually is beneficial to try to consume something, within an hour or so, because you can stimulate muscle glycogen replenishment at a faster rate within 2 hours after a training session, as opposed to waiting and then consuming carbohydrates. So it all kind of goes to what are you doing individually? What do you have upcoming? And what do you have going on the rest of your day? Now, if you're doing afternoon training sessions and then you go home, well, I wouldn't wait. I'd eat dinner. You know what I'm saying? Or if you train in the morning and you had a little bit before, because you couldn't eat a ton, and that, hey, I can't get anything until lunch, 4 or 5 hours out, then yeah, I want to kind of at least eat breakfast right afterwards and not just delay it.
Got it. Okay. But you said overall, just for like, it's really like the 24 hours, there's benefits, but then there's this sort of, if you're really like serious and want to optimize the body hacking, then there's something to be said about within 30 minutes and 2 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
I have something that I could share too. It's interesting that you're talking about sleep today because I happen to be reading Why We Sleep.
Matthew Walker.
Yeah. And if anybody is interested, this is, as far as I'm concerned, is a really great book that everybody should read about the risk impacts of minimal sleep, health and mental. And I actually am sharing it around here where I live with some people just because nobody is really aware of what, and this is all research based. So it's great stuff.
It's a really good book.
Nice.
I think it's an excellent way sleep is so powerful, and it's not something we used to have to worry about quite as much when we weren't as dysregulated from our environment.
Well, not only does it share information with you, but it also scares the heck out of you because he talks about just one night of deprived sleep can impact you 10 years down the road and cut time off your life. One night. My goodness, that's, many of us try not to, but sometimes things get in the way.
I should be dead then.
Yeah.
Let's hope not. Has anybody got anything else?
I just had another question about the sleep is like, do you actually like? So I tend to like get up in the middle of the night, have to go to the bathroom once or twice, and some actually like last few nights has been like a lot. I don't know why, um, but also like just with our basic bedroom equipment, like our mattress or a pillow, like the comfort. I'm realizing like, oh, I don't know if I have the best stuff because just like wondering if it's like affecting my sleep too, like causing me to wake up. But do you actually have like recommendations on that kind of stuff, like mattress comforter or just anything that can help? Like I really believe what you're saying, and I want to do my best to get that 7 to 9 hours. 'Cause I believe I'm that type of person. I need like the 7 to 9 hours,
Yeah.
but I have a hard time getting like a quality like 7 to 9 hours. So I want to do whatever I can to.
A couple things to look at. One is if you're peeing a lot at night, maybe you need to cut off fluids by like an hour before bed. Pratik, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think paying a little bit of attention, and I know you just went through a tournament, which there are unique situations where it was hot and humid, and you're probably just trying to do a lot to replenish after the fact. So this is a great learning opportunity for what the recommendations can be for the next time. Strategically using electrolyte packets before, during, and then afterwards, just to replenish. And then it's not just about the fluid you end up drinking. If it's water by itself, and if the body doesn't necessarily need it, it's going to fill up in the bladder. The bladder can hold about 16 ounces before it's time to say, hey, I can't hold this void reflex anymore, and then I got to pee. Another thing too is just regulating the acid base balance in the body. And I've had a lot of athletes have success taking in like sodium bicarbonate, or basically like a teaspoon of baking soda in the evening too, just to help with those night urinations, the night voidings.
As far as the sheets and the bedding, you want like higher thread count, breathable sheets are better. The firmness of the mattress, that's totally up to you. I mean, that is a personal preference. I would say like at a certain point in time, your mattress does begin to degrade, and you don't want to get into a situation where it's like slumping and things like that. If you can afford to, I think it's like every 8 years or so, you should be also rotating your mattress. There are, like the cooling pads. Those are personal preference. Um, you know, I I think they're helpful. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence that people really like them. I think the Uller is a great option that you don't have to actually replace your mattress. It can slide right underneath your side of the bed and you can do temperature adjustment. Um, I would just make sure, like, also you cutting off caffeine early enough in the day. Are you drinking caffeine past 3 o'clock? For some people, that's not a great idea. The earlier you can cut caffeine off, that's going to help. But I would look at the fundamental practices like we talked about before. Are you consistent? And when you go to bed and when you wake up, are you going to bed? And I would say ideally you want to be asleep before midnight, ideally kind of in that 11 o'clock, before 11 o'clock. And then are you getting enough sunlight throughout the day? And then is your room set up the right way? Do you have the appropriate relationship with light? If you're checking all those boxes consistently for 3, 4 weeks and you're still having issues, then let's take the next step, another step further.
Okay. And then with salt, I don't know if we've talked about it all, but is there a point where I tend to eat like salt my food a lot? Is there anything to watch out for in overconsumption of salt with the training and the nutrition and the sleep?
I think again, it's an individualized recommendation. If you cook most of your own food and you're not eating a lot of prepackaged ultra processed food or food from outside, then controlling your salt and sodium intake is actually a lot easier, and people will generally eat less than they think they are. And the only time I really recommend utilizing electrolytes is when you're going through a training session. So if you're going into a lift, you don't necessarily have to worry about it that much. But if you're going into a really intense training session where you're going to be sweating out quite a bit, or you're going into competition, then you know that you're going to be you're sweating more, and your sweat composition is going to increase because you are sweating out more. So the utilization of those, sodium packets, the LMNTs, and things of that nature will become more beneficial, because then you're just putting in the body what you're losing. So it's not taking it to an extended level, or going through any kind of super compensation. It's the people that don't train regularly, they're not eating much potassium, they're not, taking magnesium. Obviously, that's one big thing that we provided. But in general, my recommendation for most people is, in this ratio, you want like a 4 to 2 to 1 ratio of potassium to sodium to magnesium. So if you do increase your sodium content, just want to make sure that you are consuming enough potassium, and you've got, at least some magnesium in the system too, potentially from supplemental sources.
We are going to do a talk on hydration here soon. So Pratik's going to do a little bit of a deep dive on that, but I will get out the tournament guide today, the deck for this, the video. If y'all have any other questions, go ahead and make sure to DM us on Circle. We're putting the finishing touches on the next training block. I'm going to send that out, or Pratik will deploy that. But before it goes out, I'm going to record a Loom video walkthrough on that training block, so everybody knows, what's coming up next. So keep at it. Y'all are doing awesome. We're excited to be a part of this. And if you have any questions, just hit us up. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. It was really amazing, and I'm just trying to like absorb every little bit I can. I appreciate your backgrounds and all the stuff that you guys put together.
Phil, we're thrilled to have you. We have such a really cool group, and we're here. Use this as a resource, okay, my friend? All right, we'll be talking to y'all soon.
Thank you.
You got it, brother.
Okay.
All right, Pratik, I'll get all this downloaded and sent out.
Awesome.
That was good. All right, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.